The Germans aren't happy about the claim they've been held captive by Russia, but that doesn't the president have a point somewhere? Should the Europeans pony up? Joining me now, it is Utah Senator Mike Lee. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
So obviously everyone in that room, everyone who's party to these talks is not used to hearing such a forceful tone. And that's what a lot of people, whether they're pundits or leaders, that's what they're hung up on. But talk about the message the president was sending. Is it a legitimate one?
It's absolutely a legitimate one, and I think we really need to have this discussion as Americans about the fact that we've been footing the bill for the NATO alliance for a really long time. We've got all these countries that have agreed to devote at least 2% of GDP per year to defense, and they haven't been doing that. Many of them haven't done it for a long time or even come close. Meanwhile, they're moving down the road of Western European-style socialism.
Yes.
And we're indirectly funding that by providing for their defense needs. I think it's high time someone call them out on it, and I respect President Trump for doing that.
You're absolutely right, because, you know, a lot of these countries, they can't afford to spend 2% of GDP on this defense alliance. And, you know, that's understandable, but you have to look at where their money is going and the fact that a lot of their economies are, in fact, cratering. Germany's is not. Germany is doing quite well, and they are being hypocritical here, asking to pay less than 2%, but at the same time benefiting from open trade with Russia. However, what they show is that there is peace through prosperity, and isn't that in and of itself a very valuable lesson?
Sure. Peace through prosperity is a very valuable lesson. It's something we've always got to take into account. And we also have to be very cautious not to get sucked into excessively entangling alliances throughout the world. And we've also got to make sure that those allies that we do have are pulling their load. We can't constantly be the world's policeman. We've got to make sure that we're not out there fighting everyone else's wars or agreeing preemptively to do that.
There are those who say that the United States has benefited more from NATO and the help we received after 9/11 than most of the other member nations. What do you have to say about that?
Well, look, there's some of that argument that you could put into the category of post hoc, ergo Proctor hoc. I mean, we have enjoyed a certain period of peace in the post 9/11 era, perhaps more so than many people would have anticipated. But that doesn't mean that these other nations shouldn't contribute their fair share toward our defense.
Well, if they don't want to contribute, then we have to ask the question whether or not NATO is outdated and if it should exist at all in this postmodern era.
I think that's exactly right. And look, there's no reason why we should have to be forever bound by this alliance.
Yes.
What makes sense for us at one time in history doesn't necessarily bind us to that course of action in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. And this is not a sovereign nation. And we have to re-examine this from time to time. And if we've got people who aren't pulling their load, we ought to reconsider the alliance as a whole.
Now, Senator Lee, I want to shift a little bit and talk about the Supreme Court nomination. You have been very positive about the president's nominee, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. I was hoping you would be the one the president picked. I wasn't alone in that. There were several liberty-leaning voices out there who were calling for the president and appealing to his rationality to appoint someone like you who would be by far the most constitutional and best, most consistent choice to sit on the high court. Obviously, as we move forward, and if the president does in fact have another pick to go on the Supreme Court, I think you would be a safer bet in more contentious times, because you know your Republican and Democrat colleagues very well, and they would be more likely to vote for someone who is a logical voice like yours. So are you as disappointed as I am?
Well, first of all, Kennedy, thank you very much for your kind words tonight and also for your kind words in the last few days. They're much appreciated. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. In the meantime, I'm representing the people of Utah in the United States Senate. I'm very grateful for that privilege. I'm also grateful for the fact that we do have the opportunity to fill this seat. Judge Kavanaugh is well respected. He's got a long, distinguished track record as a jurist, and I look forward to moving him through the process in the Senate.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the objections that there are, very few, unfortunately, very few truly liberty-minded lawmakers in Congress. Rand Paul happens to be one of them. Justin Amash is another. I had Congressman Amash on last night, and he's very disappointed with the pick. He is very concerned about some of the opinions that Judge Kavanaugh has written on the Fourth Amendment, particularly in regards to the NSA. Do you share those concerns?
I'm a big proponent of an aggressive defense of Fourth Amendment rights. And I share many of the same concerns that have motivated people like Justin Amash and Rand Paul in the past to be critical of some of the federal government's practices, like its use of bulk telephone metadata collection. It's one of the reasons why I authored the USA Freedom Act that ended that practice a few years ago. So I very much share the underlying concerns. That doesn't mean that this particular jurist, Judge Kavanaugh, would be hostile to those views. I'm still reviewing his record. I don't know that he would always reach exactly the same conclusions that I've reached as a lawmaker, but the rules differ somewhat. And I will note that in one of the opinions that Judge Kavanaugh wrote that dealt with that issue, he acknowledged that a lot of this is appropriately handled by Congress and by the executive branch, which we did in that same year, in 2015, in passing the USA Freedom Act.
There's still more oversight and transparency that is needed. That's why we need you on Capitol Hill. Continued success in the job that you're doing, and a very graceful response to the president's nomination. So you lead by fine example. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Very good.